Um, I'll use the words quote unquote the cool kids. Um, and when I say the cool kids, like the kids that are kind of screwing around, that everybody thinks is funny, that everybody listens to because they have the social respect of everybody else. Um, and then on the other side of it, you've got a kid who really wants to get better at baseball or whatever sport it is, that's listening, engaging, um, but it's also friends with the cool kids. Like how how does I guess I'll use the term being liked versus wanting to be good. How does that hurt kids in their development, and what have you seen in your experience?
Yeah, that's a great topic because peer pressure is one of the strongest pressures kids feel, and um, and I personally think that a lot of times you get kids that are the cool kids that don't want to put in the hard work. Um, their commitment level isn't as strong as some people might think it is. They might have some talent already, so they are somewhat successful at the level they're playing. So what they don't want is they don't want the other kids to show them up or to get off the track of what they're doing, because then it puts pressure on them to do something different. So it is very important to get those cool kids, quote unquote cool kids, to understand that, hey, look, uh, this isn't how we do things. We have expectations, we have standards, and you're going to live by those standards and expectations, or you're not going to play. And so many coaches are hesitant
Mm-hmm.
to to make those better players that are usually what you would call the cool kids
Mm-hmm.
that aren't getting the most out of their ability and talent, are hesitant to hold those kids accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a huge mistake in
Mm-hmm.
coaching. And I see it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is it lowers the level of success for your team and your program. Those cool kids are going to be gone, and a new group of cool kids are going to come in.
Right.
So you're creating a program that's the environment and the
Mm-hmm.
culture of that program.
Mm-hmm.
Coaches talk about culture all the time, and it's a word that's used all the time that really isn't taken as seriously as it should. It's used, but not taken as seriously as it should. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when you, like I said, I built programs from scratch or from less than scratch at
Mm-hmm.
times. And the first thing that I had to do was focus on the culture. Coach Corbin did that at Vanderbilt.
Right.
He changed the culture. And I witnessed that. I saw that over the years. And I
Mm-hmm.
see how he's evolved as a baseball coach.
Mm-hmm.
But the hard part's changing that culture.
Yeah.
And if coaches allow the cool kids to dictate the culture, that program will never succeed consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And those kids will never develop to the best of their abilities and the
Mm-hmm.
best of their talents.
Right.
So sometimes you got to go backwards before you go forwards.
Right. And I think it's a hard thing to do, especially as a coach, because if you're trying to keep everybody accountable, um, and then you try to make the social leader or whatever, to be accountable, I think the first initial reaction is he's going to start a mutiny against the
Mm-hmm.
coach, and he's going to be like, I don't like this guy, hey, I want you to get on my side so that we can, kind of just not do what he's doing. We're not going to be held accountable. Like, who's with me? Um, and then at that point, it's kind of a back and forth of, a battle versus, the coach and those kids. And then everybody else is kind of watching like, oh my God, like what's going to happen. So, you know, as a coach, it's a challenge where you kind of have to stick to your guns and say like, listen, like this is this is how we do things. If you guys, you kind of offer it to them and just say like, if you guys don't want to be a part of this, go somewhere else. That's fine. Um, and then I think when you say something like that, you've got everybody kind of goes, you know, looks back at the cool kids and they're like, what are you going to do now? Um, so, and that's hard to do because internally it gets a lot of like, oh no, what have I done? You know, um, but you know, if it's cliche and all those different types of things, but you know, the culture is, I think, just so important, and just sticking to your guns that way. And trust me, I've failed at that many times. I have failed at that many times by, you know, hey, it's okay. This guy's good, or this guy's, he's going to be fine. Let's leave him alone. But um, it's always in the long run come back and bitten me.
Mhm.
Um, so learning that and just kind of sticking to your guns without being a jerk about it is really important. Um, I think kids are trying to find a weakness in coaches all the time, because anybody that's trying to hold kids accountable, they're not going to like it. But if you can do it in a respectful way and stick to your guns, I think there's a level of respect. Not to say that everyone's going to be obedient, but there's an okay, this is what we're trying to do. Let's move forward in that way instead of doing just what I want to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think one thing that I always try to keep in mind, and if I talk to young coaches, I tell them, and they ask me my opinion on something, or they ask me advice on something, and I say you cannot be afraid to lose. If you have a fear of losing, if you're afraid to lose, then you can't build a culture in your program.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're afraid to lose, you're not going to hold people accountable.
Right.
You're not going to be consistent with your expectations and standards. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're not consistent with your expectations and standards, you might as well not have any.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and not everything is black and white. It's not. There is gray areas. For example, I had a young man once that was a really good football player, and my right at the fall meeting, I told the kids and the parents every year, spring break, you don't miss games, you don't miss practices, and you're not going on vacation on spring break. If you choose to go on vacation on spring break, you're choosing to quit the baseball team. I'm not kicking you off. You're choosing to quit, and you will hand in. See, it's how you message things too. You've got
Right.
to do that. So I had a young man who was a football player, and he he wanted. We were taking a trip to Tallahassee. We're going to go to a Florida State baseball game and play 3 games down there and get out of the North Georgia mountains a little bit better weather. Also to get out the kids out of their comfort zone and play some teams they don't normally play on the road, which they don't normally do. So he had this big thing going on at the University of Georgia where they invited him to come and participate in some football things, recruiting stuff. So he came to me. Well, first his mom called me and said, I'm not talking to you about this because I always want to teach, hey, the kids need to talk to me, not the parents. Now I'll work with you as parents, but we have to have conversations. The kid conversation comes first. So the mom called me and said, hey, Miles is going to come talk to you about something. And I just want you to know he's really nervous about it. I said, that's fine. Tell him to come and we'll have a conversation. It's fine. So Miles comes and he talks to me about this thing. He says, Coach, I really think I should go to this and miss the trip. I hate missing the trip because I want to go with the team, but I think this is important for my future. And he explained the trip to me. And I said, Miles, you have my blessing. You go on this trip. And I will not penalize you in any way for going on this trip. You came to me like a man. You talked to me about it. It's important for your future. These aren't region games. They're that count toward our playoff standings. Go enjoy that. And when you come back, it's like you never left. So, and anyway, and the end of the story is the boy now is playing football at the University of Georgia and has 2 national championship rings, right?
Nice.
So it all turned out great. And I look back and say, I did the right thing for this young man
Hmm.
as a coach. But my standards were you don't miss games or practices. But still, there's life is life and common sense is common sense. I even had a young man once that his mom had cancer, and they weren't they socioeconomically they struggled, and he had to get a job, and he would leave practice early every day to go work at a restaurant.
Yeah.
So those are the things that those are things that what your standards apply, but life is life. Now, if a kid just misses because he wants to go to a concert with his girlfriend, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Okay, so but you've got to uphold your standards with every player. Like if your best player doesn't hustle to first base and that's your thing, or he throws a bat
Yeah.
because he strikes out, and you don't take him out of the game when you would take another kid out of the game.
Yeah.
Now the thing about it is, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, as parents.
Hmm.
Parents don't mind if you have your standards and expectations and apply them to everybody else's kid, but
Hmm.
they don't like it when you apply it to theirs.
Sure.
And that's a struggle too. But hey, it's again, you got to stand strong. Say this is, we're trying to teach young men because 95% of the kids I coach in high school aren't going to play college baseball or do anything with baseball once they graduate.
Right. Right. Are those standards, um, are those standards something that you lay out on the front end very clear, like this is what we're going to do and we're going to uphold you to these standards? Or do you kind of just say, as the practices and the games occur, you start implementing those standards and they figure it out on their own, or
No,
both?
I think as a coach, um, I think you've got to let your players and parents know what your expectations and standards are ahead of time. And it does a couple things for you. One, you lay it all out there. Now, obviously, you can't write down and talk about every little thing, but I actually have documents that I would share with the players and the parents every fall at the beginning of the school year. We'd have a meeting. This is what you need to do. Baseball tryouts are like, for example, I had a coach that I know that was the coach at one of the schools I coached at before me. And he's a friend and he's a good guy. He's a really good person. But, the kids in high school, they have to have a physical, they have to have all this different paperwork before they can participate in tryouts for liability issues, health issues, all kinds of other things. So, um, baseball practice starts in January. And this coach, he's on the first day of tryouts, he's dealing with kids that haven't had their physicals yet. I'm like, what are you doing? He said, you need these kids, if they really want to be baseball players, they'd have this taken care of already. And well, I know, but if I don't let them play, then they're gonna, and he was afraid to lose.
Right.
So I said, well, this is what I do. And he goes, you can't, how can you do that? And I said, well, this is what I do. I tell them at a meeting in September that all this paperwork needs to be completed and turned in before we leave for Christmas break if you want to try out for baseball. That gives them September, October, November, and part of December to get these things taken care of. And being on the baseball team is not that important to them if they can't take care of those things in those few months.
Yeah.
And if they come to practice on the first day of tryouts and they don't have those things, they're not playing.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
care if they're the best athlete in our school.